Greetings, comics lovers! Welcome to a new series I'm running on my channel. I am still workshopping the title, so before we get into a title, I am going to do a series based off of the top 10 strangest comic book characters. Now, you've already clicked on the title, you already know what it's about, but play along with me, and we're going to talk about the Superfriends. Not just a cartoon, but there was actually a comic book series that ran for, I believe, 47 issues from 1976 to 1981, which is an impressive run considering the fact that I believe they changed the title of the series multiple times. So let's get into some of the strangest original characters they introduced for that series. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to preface the fact that I have not read Skyrocket's introductionary and only appearance so far. But apparently he has something to do with the Riddler, which I think is really cool. Can you imagine this guy hanging out with this guy in the Batman Part 2? Man, that sentence is going to age that video very soon. You also might remember a character who was introduced in the pages of Justice League of America in around 2002, who had a very similar name. It was also part of a pitch for a transgender Superboy story where they would start calling themselves Skyrocket. And of course, there's also the character of Roxy Rocket from the Batman, the animated series, or the New Adventures of Batman. It's very interesting how this character's gimmick has sort of been taken. You know, he's so forgotten about that his whole niche really doesn't matter anymore. He's just completely irreparably replaced in the annals of comic book history. Although I think it would be cool if he came back and started hanging out with the Riddler. You notice there's not a lot to talk about with this character. That's because he didn't do much. He was just a henchman for the Riddler. But I think it would be interesting if he came back as sort of a Riddler goon. Maybe they can retcon him as one of those wannabe Riddlers in the Batman too. Notice how I keep coming back to that. I just think that's a cool idea. Okay, so this one is kind of cheated since he appeared in the Earth 1 continuity originally, but I don't want to count him anyway since I want to talk about him. Personally, I love this guy's design. A four-armed alien invader is just really cool, but I feel like the Justice League already has a ton of those in the form of Despero, Kanjaro, and various stone-faced others. In fact, I've got a whole planet full of them on Apocalypse. I think this four-armed fiend would be a very good foe for the likes of Martian Manhunter, seeing as how his rogues gallery is already very, very small. He's collected all these various alien technologies, so nothing he's ever done has ever been original. It'd be cool to see like how he has some kind of inferiority complex for it. Interestingly enough, his plot in Superfriends number 7 would lead to the creation of the Global Guardians, who would eventually spin off memorable characters who would become important to the Justice League International a few years later. We'll get back to the Guardians of the Globe eventually, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Kingslayer. Now here's one that eventually made it into the mainstream continuity again. Kingslayer's name was pretty hardcore for what was essentially a media tie-in to a children's cartoon. In the New 52, his whole gimmick was he specifically assassinated royalty and politicians, giving him some special political dogma for doing so. I can always appreciate a villain with an ideology and a specific motivation. In his original appearance, he was hired by a villain called Overlord, who, of course, was unsuccessful. And even though his plotline is very serious in concept, there's a lot of goofiness that surrounds it, which I think is very humorous looking back. He was reintroduced in the New 52 with Wonder Woman, Steve Trevor, and Superman teaming up to stop him. I think they should play up the whole gimmick that he has a rivalry with Steve Trevor. I feel like he would play a very cool role in Wonder Woman's very disorganized rogues gallery. I mean, look at that. The name Kingslayer. It sounds like it fits in with Wonder Woman, doesn't it? I think it does. Don't tell me what I should think. Okay, so I'll keep this brief because I want to do a video on this guy in the future. Overlord was basically the overarching villain of the series. He had no particular powers or anything that was interesting about him except for his world domination gimmick, which, has been done 100 times before in the history of comic books, but I really do like his name. I feel like he'd be a more intimidating villain if he didn't wear pink, though. The main reason why he's not higher is just because I think he's generic. They could rework him. There was an issue that specifically dealt with mind control, which I feel like could be a really intimidating power for a villain. It's weird how much he's got to push in this series despite being, forgotten. Have any of you heard of Overlord in the comments? Let me know down below. Alright, so first of all, Menagerie Man is just a really cool name. I love the word menagerie, too. This costume is alright for its time. But what I feel like really lets him down is his execution. I mean, he would be really cool if he was executed correctly. Let's get into his power set. His power set is he carries around little tiny animals in his belt. He's able to shrink himself and these animals down using the Dwarf Star technology from the Atom. What would be really cool is if he was able to materialize fantasy or alien creatures on his own whim. I feel like he would be a perfect antagonist for the Atom, who really specifically does not have a lot of antagonists. I can only think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head. I really could see him being a really good foe for the Atom. It's just that, he's just generic as they come. That's probably why he's gotten so high on the list. It's just because, he's boring. At least he put in 2 appearances, though, which is more than most of these guys on this list can say. Okay, so his name might suck, but it is a good fit for his plant-based powers. Unfortunately, his niche has been fulfilled by much better characters like the Pharaonic Man, who appeared in Batman and Robin, by the way, and the ever-popular Poison Ivy in Batman's Rogues Gallery. Hell, his name has even been taken by another character in a different company. I mean, how do you get away with that? I mean, he doesn't even have a real profile on the DC Wiki. You might as well not even exist if you don't have a profile on there. His sole appearance is in this single issue where he became an enemy of the Superfriends. You might recognize this character on the cover, which is known as Green Fury in the issue, but she was later known as Fire, who you might recognize from the Justice League International. She was an obvious favorite of the writers, seeing as how she kept putting in appearances with the rest of the group. I think it has something to do with the fact that there were so few female heroes who were active at the time. Seeing as how they have a history together, I think it would be nice if he started bothering Fire and Ice again. Maybe forming a trifecta of the elements. Hell, maybe he even gets a wind-themed counterpart. I like his vibe overall. He's a very classic supervillain. At the same time, he also feels very generic, like the kind of villain you'd see in a background but isn't really meant to be someone specific. The Kirkland brand supervillain, if you will. He's actually the reason why I made this list and the reason why he's so high on it. Okay, this guy is really close to being cool if he didn't look like Dan Aykroyd and the Coneheads. He'd be freaking awesome if he had some kind of metal helmet, but it makes a bit more sense when you realize he was intended to be designed with ties to Plastic Man. There's apparently a few warheads running around the comic book world. Apparently there was one that was an enemy to Wonder Woman who only lasted a single issue. Talk about pathetic. There's a lot of potential with this guy, only if he's reimagined right. You can even keep the Conehead look. Just put on a helmet, man. I really wish I could get into the origin of these characters, but they really don't have origin stories. They just sort of materialize. One good thing I can say about Warhead is even though he looks goofy, he still fits the tone of the story. You can tell the issue he appeared in was an absolute homage to the original Plastic Man run by Jack Cole. The cartoony Dick Tracy-esque supervillains feel right at home in Plastic Man's world, and I'd love to see a return to that in future stories. Okay, number 1 is basically cheating, but I had to put him here. He was a one-off villain who really didn't rise to prominence until the Super Friends. Well, too off, but you know what I mean. So I'm counting him. It's honestly amazing how this guy has never been on the Suicide Squad. Despite how goofy he is, I love him. I love his color palette. And I love the idea of using flight against Aquaman. He was given a sidekick in the form of Sardine, but I'm going to ignore him. He has a lot of potential to be reimagined as cool and serious, but I hope they keep that goofy part of him. I love the goofy part of this character. You know, I'm getting off topic here, but, you know, I think the whole part of what makes Aquaman cool is his underwater theming, that fantasy element that a lot of superheroes don't have. Specifically, that unique environment of underwater is so cool. I think flying fish was used because Aquaman's villains weren't particularly in a good place at the time. I might be off on the chronology, but I'm pretty sure the reason why they did not use Black Manta in the first issue is because Black Manta had suffocated Aquaman's infant son to death. Yeah, 70s comics, wild. So probably wasn't a good idea to use in tandem with tie-in to the Saturday morning cartoon. Black Manta did, however, make it into the cartoon, I recall. Either way, I'm glad the character of Flying Fish exists. He reminds me of a much simpler time in comic books where things were just a lot more goofier. I love him. I love everything about this character. You know, I just can't help but love him. I'd love to see him in a future Suicide Squad movie, or if by the grace of God, somehow Aquaman 3 happens with Jason Momoa, then Flying Fish and the Fisherman should be the main villains. Enough said. Thank you all for watching this video and going into my humble domain for a little bit and indulging me on my insanity. I really don't have a pre-written epilogue for this section of the video, but I'm really glad you guys could watch this and comment some other obscure and forgotten supervillains you'd love to hear about. I'll be happy to take requests. Thank you guys. Stay safe and have a great time.